stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. In my work with coaching clients, I guide people to improve their communication using storytelling as the foundation of our work together. What I've realized over years of coaching and podcasting is that the majority of people don't realize the impact of the stories they share on their own internal messages and on the people they're sharing them with. My work with leaders and people who aspire to be leaders follows a similar path to the interviews on my podcast, uncovering pivotal moments in their lives and learning how to share them to connect more authentically with others, to make their presentations and speaking more engaging, to reveal patterns that have kept them stuck or move them forward, and to improve their relationships at work and at home. This week's episode of the podcast is a sneak peek of the audiobook, Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will, to be released in mid-November. As a special bonus for listeners, the book will include 2 songs recorded by my band, Spare Change, in my living room in Montana. Keep an eye out for announcements through LinkedIn and via my Elkins Consulting Facebook and Instagram pages, or visit my website, elkinsconsulting.com, to learn more. Well, today's podcast features my friend Michael Fuller that I've known since, you were in 7th grade or so?
Oh, goodness. I've known you as long as I can remember. That's probably the best way to answer it. So long. You knew my mom way before you knew me.
That's true, and your dad. I actually met your dad first. But anyway, that's not really part of the story here. The important part of the story is that we've taken a few hikes together since the COVID pandemic started. And every time we've had our walks together, you've shared something about your story that I find really meaningful, inspiring, insightful, whatever it is at that moment. And we've actually talked about recording a podcast episode together more than once. And so I thought this would be a perfect time. So for our listeners, we're sitting here on my front porch in Helena, Montana, rocking in rocking chairs and drinking some Starbucks hot drinks because it's a little chilly.
Yeah, just a bit.
And Michael was kind enough to bring my favorite kind of potato chips for us to snack on. So if you hear a little crunch, that might be what you're hearing.
I'll limit it. I'll limit myself to 1 crunch per minute.
And you might just hear a little bit of traffic going by here and there. So what I'd like to start with is if you could share something about yourself. No, our listeners haven't heard you before. If you could share something about yourself that most people wouldn't know about you. Maybe people that are in your life now that weren't in your life when you were younger.
Probably the biggest person in my life that isn't in my life when I was younger is my partner, Mike, who I met through Starbucks through my twin. Fun story, he actually used to hit on my brother before he met me. We've been together, it'll be 3 years, I think, in February. I think he's probably been one of the biggest blessings in my life as I've traveled through my journey through pre-med to go to medical school. That's probably something that a lot of people know about me is I'm striving to be a physician. One thing that a lot of people don't know is I want to go into psychiatry, particularly pediatric psychiatry, because I love working with kids and I think there's a great demand in Montana. And I could not have asked for a better partner. He tolerates me staying up at night, studying for biochemistry, crying over a physical chemistry exam. I did do that at midnight one night. I just stressed so badly. I started crying in bed and the dog put his head right in my lap as I just sobbed and sobbed. So that's probably one of the ones that's most influential in my life. A little fact that a lot of people don't know about me, and I just learned about myself this year, is I can sew. I've actually been sewing my own scrubs. I found a pattern online. I took a sewing class, and I've been sewing my own scrubs. It's been really therapeutic because you just get into a rhythm, the pulse of the machine, sometimes put a little music in the background. So that's a fun little thing I learned about myself this year, and a lot of people don't know about me.
Well, that's something I didn't know about you, and I've known you a long time. So sewing, how fun is that? I've never really been into sewing, even though I've done some hand sewing, hand stitching. So that's always fascinating to me. you said that you kind of get into a flow and it's kind of therapeutic. Do you remember the first time you did it? Was it when you got into that flow state?
I think the first time I got into it was about 2 weeks into my class, where I had finally gotten used to not jamming the machine or having to stop every few seconds to readjust. Something just clicked where it could just go into this rhythm. I didn't really need to focus. I just followed the lines, and I noticed that when I wasn't trying so hard and focusing so much, my stitches came out a lot cleaner and a lot straighter because I could just let my hand and the machine do the work. It was really quite calming. And so when COVID started, when I wasn't attending class in person, between classes I would just go to the sewing machine and just kind of relax in my pajamas most of the time because I didn't need to get into real clothing. And it was a really nice way to de-stress, particularly as I was preparing for the MCAT. For my medical school applications, and I was used to having friends around to study with them, and then when my college went completely online, I didn't have that support group anymore, so having like a fun, creative outlet I could just relax to was a huge benefit and blessing.
Absolutely. I think not enough people explore that creative side where they can find something, whatever it is, to get into that flow state. And as you're describing it, I'm kind of imagining myself sitting next to you with the sound of the motor of the sewing machine and the way that it gets into that rhythm, and you just kind of fall into it. And I love the idea of stopping fighting it. Like you get into this, you're thinking too hard, you're trying too hard, and then at some point you realize that the machine will do the work. You just need to guide it.
Oh yeah, once you stop fighting the machine, it was so much easier, because that's the first thing I had to learn was the machine does a lot of the work. It's just guiding the fabric at that point. I didn't need to pull the fabric, which when I first started doing it, I ripped a hole. And at one point, it was like a good inch-long hole because I was trying to tug the fabric. So just learning how to go with the machine, it was so nice.
Do you find any application in that when you're trying to, like when you were studying for the MCAT? Being able to let it flow rather than trying so hard?
Yeah, I think when there were certain subjects, physics in particular, was really difficult for me. And I found that when I was hitting a block, when I got stuck on a certain problem, that was a time for me to get up, walk away, and do something else. That if I tried forcing myself to continue to study, I wasn't going to get as much out of it as I wanted. And it's actually something I've tried to pass on to freshmen and sophomores. When you hit a block, don't try to keep pushing. You're going to get more frustrated. You're not going to retain the information. So I just take a break, sew, play Minecraft, go on a walk, something like that. And then I'd re-tackle it and try to think from a different angle. Because sometimes just being away, I'd have this moment of, oh, maybe this is actually what the question is asking, and go back and redo it. I tend to do better that time.
I think that's wise advice. And I would encourage you to even keep thinking about that as you start medical school coming. Is it going to be?
It's going to be the fall of 2021.
Fall of 2021. So one of the things we talked about on one of our hikes is why medical school. And you were talking about your mother.
Yeah, so I'll start from the very beginning, because it's a question every single interview I've had asks, why did you want to go into medical school? I read a book by Rick Riordan called The Hot Zone, which is a really fascinating book for people who like viruses, particular the Ebola virus. It follows the history of Ebola and its discovery and how it works. I thought it was fascinating. And so at first I wanted to go into virology. I just loved studying viruses, reading more about how they worked. And then my sophomore year of high school, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so I started to go more into research of breast cancer and cancer in general and how it works. And I would attend my mom's meetings with her, her appointments with her physicians. And the thing that just amazed me was how compassionate the doctors were, how patient they were, how adoring they were with my mom, which made a very scary and difficult journey so much better. So it was then that I started to take pre-med classes in high school. And I figured I really wanted to be a doctor, not a nurse. I had someone ask, why not any other healthcare profession? And I realized that I've always been a natural leader. And I think that's part of the duty of a physician is not to, I see this problem quite a bit with some of the older physicians is they kind of have this air of superiority that it's my way or the highway that as a ruler, but I think a physician truly is a leader and a mentor. And I can see myself in that position. So I started to really pursue pre-med, and that's where I went to Carroll College to get my undergraduate degree. And 3 years ago, I was offered a job by 2 family friends who were psychiatrists. And I started working at their psychiatric medical practice, where I've been for 3 wonderful years. And through my journey through psychiatric medical care, I realized that my passion, my calling is psychiatry, is to be a psychiatrist. One of the beauties of it is just sitting and listening to a patient. That I think psychiatry is the most human of all medicine. Oncology, you have to know the patient's cancer diagnosis, sometimes their genetic history. With pediatrics, it can be they broke an arm, they have the flu. It's all sorts of different issues. Neurology, you may find Parkinson's or migraines, but psychiatry, you have to know the person before you make the diagnosis. You have to know their history, their hopes, their dreams, what bothers them so that you can be a part of their journey of healing. And I think that's the beauty, and that's really solidified my goal to be a doctor. I want to be a part of that healing journey. I want to help lead that patient from a very dark spot into their life into a more happy and normal life.
So when you think about what's going on now with the virus, I know you have a different perspective about it because of this experience in terms of how we are going to be able to address the issues that are already showing up in terms of mental health and emotional health issues as a result of isolation and the polarization. And I'm not talking just the political polarization, but people feeling more isolated because the mask has become a symbol of some political standing. So from your perspective, what do you see moving forward?
I think a lot of this is going to weigh on the election. And that's the frightening part. A medical and scientific issue became the one thing it should have never been, a political issue. The coronavirus is not some conspiracy theory. It's not some government trying to rule its citizens. This is a very real virus. The last time we saw a virus like this was the Spanish flu. And even then, it's not reached the contagious level that we're seeing at this point. I think moving forward, the only way we're going to get through this is if people take masks seriously. We've seen Asian countries really take a hold of this pandemic by wearing masks because culturally that's always been acceptable because they've had viruses like this. SARS was prevalent at one point. So culturally that's more acceptable. I think that if we make it acceptable to wear a mask, that it's okay and it's actually for the better of our society, I think we're going to get through this a lot quicker.
What about the mental health issues? And what are you seeing in your work right now?
I'm seeing a lot of depression. When I worked on the behavioral health unit, it was frightening, actually. I've never seen a unit so full because patients were just losing hope. It's hard. When my senior year of college went all online, I had that depression issue too. I was isolated. I was lonely. It was so hard some days to just wake up and go online to see my friends where normally we would get lunch together and complain about a physics test together. I think trying to think of a good way to put this. I think we can get through the mental health issues of the coronavirus by just doing little acts of kindness. That you'd be surprised on how just bringing coffee to a friend or family member can make their day. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness is enough to make a person's day. one thing I've always done is when I see a veteran, I thank them for their service because I don't think they always get the recognition they deserve. And I went up to this man one day and said, thank you for your service. And a few minutes later, he waved me over and said, thank you for that. When I first got home from my service in Vietnam, a little girl spit in my eye. And he said, your thanks just made the world to me, just really lifted my day. So I think just doing those small things can really help someone that may have to isolate, someone who's a post-chemo patient with no immune system, patients with HIV who are in a lot of serious danger, elderly patients, your grandparents, maybe aunts or uncles. So just finding small little things to do to say, I love you, I'm still here for you. I think we'll be able to really take a hold of the psychological burden we're all facing.
You know, where I see this showing up especially is after the election, when people are really at odds with what happened, whatever side they're on. What you said just really kind of struck me, those small acts of kindness, and it doesn't matter who you're kind to. I would say it's actually more important to be kind to people who are demonstrating anger and depression. So for instance, when you're walking through the grocery store and you see somebody that is grumbly, you know, the frustration visible on their face, just giving them an authentic smile.
At least whatever smile you could through the mask.
Yeah, well, I've worked really hard to make it more visible that I'm smiling even just with my eyes. And I think that's something we're all going to just have to practice, is smiling with our eyes more, lifting an eyebrow, acknowledging somebody, doing a small nod, holding the door open for them. The paying it forward idea. All of those things, I think, are the only things that are going to bring us together as communities, is that acknowledgement of humanity, regardless of our political area. And the other thing about it that I keep coming back to is that very few people are politically one way or another. They have been polarized to go that direction. But really, when it comes to individual issues, people don't always associate with one party or another. And so I think we need to acknowledge that complexity of the people in our communities.
I think it was Oscar Wilde that said, the truth is never pure and rarely simple. It's either the truth is rarely pure and never simple, or the truth is never pure and rarely simple. One of those two. I can never remember which way it is. But I think it's true that there is no true black and white. It's a lot of gray area, and I think you said that well, that we need to acknowledge that there are different ways to attack an issue. We may have different views on it, but just embracing that humanity within all of us. There was a post a few months ago about Ellen DeGeneres and George W. Bush. They were at a baseball game together, and they were smiling and laughing, and the internet went crazy over it. And Ellen said, we don't agree politically on a lot of issues, but he's still my friend. And I think if we can overcome our differences, our political differences, sometimes our religious differences, it's amazing what friends you can make. I did a piece this year in Speech and Debate that was focused on overcoming what differences we had, because it was about a hologram and his interactions with living, breathing people, and how he overcame that barrier and became part of a society, integrated into a larger group of people, and became part of a friends and family. So I think it's important to overlook those differences and say, hey, we're friends. We may not agree on this certain issue, but let's go drinking together anyways.
Well, and I think it's more than overcoming. I think it's understanding that we are complex, that there's not one issue that defines us. And I think that's where we're getting into so much trouble, is when people put a judgment on somebody based on one thing that they see. My friend Amber Johnson calls it freezing people in time.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And we all do it. Like, I do it. And I have to take a step back. And one of my examples is that I was walking down the street a few months ago and saw a guy walking his dog, and I saw his dog go to the bathroom, leave a poop on somebody's yard, and the guy just kept walking. He never picked it up. So, of course, my first thought was, what a jerk, right? Of course, that's my first thought. And I actually went home to get a bag and go pick it up. And I went and I picked it up. But it occurred to me, because it was only like a block away from my house, it was one of my neighbors, and I wanted to be a good ambassador for dog owners, and so I went and picked it up. But what occurred to me later, that's loud wind.
It is. It's gusty. It's going to be this.
Wind.
It's going to be a high wind warning to tomorrow noon.
Oh boy, we did pick today to do an outdoor recording for a podcast. But anyway, it occurred to me later that I don't know his story. It's possible that he didn't notice, and he just wasn't paying attention. He was focused on something else. It's possible that he was going to go home and get a bag and come back. It's possible that he doesn't really know that that's a cultural norm here. We just don't know what his story is. And my reality was that I may run into him another time and find out that he's donated thousands of dollars to a nonprofit that I support. I just don't know where he shows up in the world outside of my one interaction with him. And I think it's really important for us to take a step back when we have that judgment, that knee-jerk reaction to something somebody does or says, to understand that there's complexity there.
I like that. Have you seen Mary Poppins Returns?
No.
Great movie. One of the songs is "A cover is not the book," and it's this whole song about, a cover is not the book. The story inside may be different than what you perceive. So I think it's really, I'm holding your book. Your stories don't define you. Everyone go buy it. I'm going to have Sarah sign it later for me. But I really like that, first impression. It's called the halo effect, actually, in psychology. Is the first impression can be the most lasting impression. And so I think that and sometimes once we have that first impression, that's all we see in a person is that halo of our first way that we saw them. And I think it's important to kind of overcome that. As you said, that person may donate a lot of money, may donate time, and I think that's really going to affect the way now I see the world, because there are times people don't wear masks, and as a medical professional, my first instinct is put on a mask. I want to go up to them and hand them a mask and say, put it on.
Right.
But maybe this is someone that may have issues of their own. While they may not wear a mask, maybe they donate meals to people that can't leave their house. So I think that's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah. Cool. Michael, as always, this has been an enlightening conversation.
Always a pleasure.
I love hearing your stories. And I love the way you think about things, especially because of the issues that we face right now. It gives me great pleasure, hope, optimism to see you as a young adult moving into medical school and the positive impacts you already have on the people around you, and knowing that the future holds a lot more of that. Like, it's scalable. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of your positive impact on our communities.
Oh, thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I'm glad you've been able to be a part of this journey, my journey, since I was just a little kid. I look forward to many more discussions over coffee, beer, kettle chips to come.
Right. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. The book of the same title is now available, and the audiobook version will be released in November 2020. If you're ready to uncover your stories and learn to uncover the stories of the people around you to create stronger connections and healthier communities, visit elkinsconsulting.com. And while you're visiting the website, you can learn more about the book and the work we do to improve communication among teams and through our one-to-one coaching. Thank you.
Now listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that?